the G. Margoliouth introduction to the Quran. And I guess when I see about making a meme, I will figure out if there's anything else for the future to do with this author. Al-Quran admittedly occupies an important position among the great religious books of the world. Though the youngest of the epoch-making works belonging to this class of literature, it yields to hardly any in the wonderful effect which it has produced on large masses of humans. It has created an all but new phase of human thought and a fresh type of character. It first transformed a number of heterogeneous desert tribes of the Arabian Peninsula into a nation of heroes, and then proceeded to create the vast political religious organizations of the Muslim world, which are one of the great forces with which Europe and the East have to reckon today. The secret of the power exercised by the book, of course, lay in the mind which produced it. It was, in fact, at first not a book, but a strong, living voice, a kind of wild, authoritative proclamation, a series of admonitions, promises, threats, and instructions addressed to turbulent and largely hostile assemblies of untutored Arabs. And it's interesting considering that it doesn't leave the hell, for example, and other such warnings. It doesn't leave that as, by itself. It always couples it, and it has, but the positive encouragement it has by itself in places. So it's overwhelmingly on the side of positive encouragement. As the book was published after the Prophet's death, in the time of Caliph Umar, but those 7 copies were not the only copies that existed at that time. In Muhammad's life, there were only disjointed notes, speeches, and the retentive memories of those who listened to them. To speak of Quran is therefore practically the same as speaking of Muhammad, and in trying to appraise the religious value of the book, one is at the same time attempting to form an opinion of the Prophet himself. His character was the Quran. If he was the exemplar prophet, the Nabi, as Semitic languages call him, then, he was the living word. So that helps you understand the book, because he's giving examples more than just repeating and, we don't eat pork, so the guy doesn't eat pork. But what else might the words teach us? Or, It would, indeed, be difficult to find another case in which there is such a complete identity between the literary work and the mind of the man who produced it. And, if it was Muhammad, you could, linguistically and such, you can see the difference between Muhammad's, I wouldn't say that as a prophet he had a secular life, but what I would say is that his inspired sayings are different from his revelation, from the revelation he received, and they were different from, I like this food or that food or whatever. That widely different estimates have been formed of Muhammad is well known. To Muslimin, he is, of course, the prophet par excellence, and Al-Quran is regarded by the Orthodox, correctly believing, as nothing less than the eternal utterance of Allah, the single and definitive term for God in Arabic. The eulogy pronounced by Carlyle on Muhammad in Heroes and Hero Worship will probably be endorsed by not a few at the present day. The extreme contrary opinion, which, in a fresh form, has recently been revived by an able writer, is hardly likely to find much lasting support. The correct view very probably lies between the two extremes. The relative value of any given system of religious thought must depend on the amount of truth which it embodies, as well as of the ethical standard which its adherents are bidden to follow. Another important test is the degree of originality that is to be assigned to it, for it can manifestly only claim credit for that which is new in it, not for that which it borrowed from other systems. And if it borrowed from other systems, you're going to find it picking up the errors of those other systems, right? Perhaps errors of its own in transmitting it, but mere difference is not quite the same. With regard to the first named criterion, there is a growing opinion among students of religious history that Muhammad may, in a real sense, be regarded as a prophet of certain truths, though by no means of truth in the absolute meaning of the term. The shortcomings of the moral teachings contained in the Quran are striking enough if judged from the highest ethical standpoint with which we are acquainted. Well, it doesn't fit in with sensibilities, but can you prove the ethics wrong? Or can you say that the ethics that would make it harder to commit what biblically would be acknowledged as a sin are the ethics that make the going to war and stuff more difficult? But a more favorable view is arrived at if a comparison is made between the ethics of the Quran and the moral tenets of the Arabian, which it didn't either fully condemn or support per se, and other forms of non-Christian tradition which it supplanted. Now, I'm not sure what he means heathen, but tribalism, we could say tribalism or something. The method followed by Muhammad in the promulgation of Al-Quran also requires to be treated with discrimination from the first flash of prophetic inspiration, which is clearly discernible in the earlier portions of the book. He, later on, frequently descended to deliberate invention and artful rhetoric. And, of course, if he did this, people would have been able to match the part of the thing. And there'd be some evidence of that sort of thing. Right there. He, in fact, accompanied his moral sense with the circumstances in which the role he had to play involved him. On the question of originality, there can hardly be two opinions, now that Al-Quran has been thoroughly compared with Christian and Jewish traditions of the time. And it is, besides some original Arabian legends, to those only that the book stands in any close relationship. The matter is, for the most part, borrowed, but the manner is all the prophet's own. Now, the Bible, because the Bible was edited down from other texts, we run into an even greater problem, because if everything can be said to be a reworking and whether summarizing or whatever, and you have the physical evidence for that, then you're having more problem acting like the Bible wasn't just, a bunch of priests sitting around deciding on a new religion based on the ones that were around. Or, I'm going to say, maybe not base, but using the ones that were around. This is emphatically a case in which originality consists not so much in the creation of new materials or thought as in the manner in which existing traditions of various hands are utilized and freshly blended to suit the special exigencies of the occasion. Well, the Quran responds to those who would have known of these things, and if you compare, you find that style or message-wise, there's too many significant differences. Biblical reminiscences, rabbinic legends, Christian traditions, mostly drawn from distorted apocryphal sources, and native stories, all first pass through the prophet's fervid mind, thence issue in strange new forms, tinged with poetry and enthusiasm, and well adapted to enforce his own view of life and duty, to serve as an encouragement to his faithful adherents, and to strike terror into the hearts of his opponents. It's like, what if he's right and we're wrong? That's the sort of terror. But there is, however, apart from its religious value, a more general view from which the book should be considered. The Quran enjoys the distinction of having been the starting point of a new literary and philosophical movement which has powerfully affected the finest and most cultivated minds among the Jews and Christians in the Middle Ages. And we see a lot of the rights we have in America and now in modern times. Islam had them where the Christian world didn't have them. And now we criticize the Muslim majority countries for picking up some of the colonial things that didn't exist before that, or some things didn't exist before World War I. Some things didn't exist until after World War II. And yet Islam is blamed for things. This general progress of the Muslim world has somehow been arrested, through westernization and return to, we did it before. Like in Persia, people, just like after Cyrus the Great, people remembered once the Muslim people took charge of the Persians. People remembered. So then you have the mullahs and the ayatollahs and stuff like this, because the memory was existing among the people. But research has shown that what European scholars knew of Greek philosophy, of mathematics, astronomy, and like sciences for several centuries before the Renaissance was, roughly speaking, all derived from Latin treatises, ultimately based on Arabic originals, and it was Al-Quran which, though indirectly, gave its first impetus to these studies among the Arabs and their allies. Linguistic investigations, poetry, and other branches of literature also made their appearance soon after or simultaneously with the publication of Al-Quran, and the literary movement thus initiated has resulted in some of the finest products of genius and learning. The style in which Al-Quran is written requires some special attention in this introduction. And in English, you're going to miss a whole lot about how the sound of the one weaves into the sound of the other, and the order makes a whole lot of sense there. The literary form is, for the most part, different from anything else we know, which, in a degree, if there was a God sanctioning a book, wouldn't there be something unique about it? In its finest passages, we indeed seem to hear a voice akin to that of the ancient Hebrew prophets, but there is much in the book which Europeans usually regard as faulty. The tendency to repetition, which is inherent characteristic of the Semitic mind appears here in exaggerated form, and there is, in addition, much in the Quran which strikes us as wild and fantastic. Now, the Rig Veda and the Samaveda employ the idea of saying the same sort of thing in the other thing, but we're talking an effectual text, and we find that some of the repetitions have symbolic meaning, or they tie to something else that's not said directly, but it's indicated through. Strikes us as wild and fantastic. Yeah, it has a effect that if it didn't do that, it wouldn't do that. The most unfavorable criticism ever passed on Muhammad's style has in fact been penned by the Prophet's greatest British admirer, Carlyle himself. And there are probably many now who find themselves in the same dilemma with that great writer. The fault appears, however, to lie partly in our difficulty to appreciate the psychology of the Arab prophet, or the language thereof. We must, in order to do him justice, give full consideration of his temperament and to the condition of things around him. We are here in touch with an untutored but fervent mind, trying to realize itself and to assimilate certain great truths which have been powerfully borne in upon him, in order to impart them in a convincing form to his fellow tribesmen. He is surrounded by obstacles of every kind, yet he manfully struggles on with this message that is within him. Learning he has none, or next to none. He can trade, but it seems, according to some of the narrations, that he had difficulty even recognizing basic letters. There's an indication he couldn't read the whole alphabet, in other words. His chief objects of knowledge are floating stories and traditions largely picked up from hearsay, and his overwrought mind is his only teacher. The literary compositions to which he had ever listened were the half-cultured, yet often wildly powerful rhapsodies of early Arabian minstrels, akin to Ossian, rather than to anything else within our knowledge. What wonder in that his Quran, his recital, but Islam refers to the other scriptures as Qurans in other languages, or because that's what God does. If there, that's what a revelation is that it's not, It's over mine, so our only teacher, literary composition was he. What wonder then that his Quran took a form which, to our colder temperaments, sounds strange, unbalanced, and fantastic. Because apparently we don't have put as much of our emotions and such into responding to text. Yet, the Muslims themselves consider the book to be the finest that ever appeared among men. Well, so the finest to still exist. Islam itself does not distinguish that Muhammad was the better prophet or the Quran was the better scripture, or, it's just that it's the one that's survived in purity. It's the one that is for this time. They find no incongruity in the style. To them, the matter is all true, and the manner all perfect. And people may believe otherwise, but they can't prove otherwise. Their Eastern temperament, well, Islam is neither the East or the West, and European and Asian and African inflections are just as strong, just like American ones, perfectly valid, responds readily to the crude, strong, and wild appeal which its cadences make to them, and the jingling rhyme in which the sentences of a discourse generally end adds to the charm of the whole. Al-Quran, even if viewed from the point of view of style alone, was, to them, from the first, nothing less than a miracle. As great a miracle as ever was wrought. But, to return to one's own view of this case, our difficulty is in appreciating the style of Al-Quran, even moderately, is, of course, increased if, instead of the original, we have a translation before us. Rodwell's seems, to a great extent, to carry with it the atmosphere in which Muhammad lived, and its sentences are imbued with the flavor of the East. The quasi-verse form, with its unfettered and irregular rhythmic flow of the lines, which has in suitable cases been adopted, helps to bring out much of the wild charm of the Arabic, not the least among its recommendations, perhaps, that it is scholarly without being pedantic, that is to say, that it aims at correctness without sacrificing the right effect of the whole to over insistence on small details. Another important feature of Rodwell's edition is its chronological arrangement of the suwar, or chapters. As he tells us himself in his preface, it is now in a number of cases impossible to ascertain the exact occasion on which a discourse or part of a discourse was delivered, so that the system could not be carried through with entire consistency, but the sequence adopted was in the main based on the best available historical and literary evidence, and in following the order of the chapters as here printed, the reader will be able to trace the development of the prophet's mind as he gradually advanced from the early flush of inspiration to the less and more equivocal role of warrior, politician, and founder of an empire. And as I said, I'll find out more about Margoliouth in making the meme, and perhaps there'll be more we can say about him at another time. Or, more of his work.